You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
What
the games,
physical basketball
I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the games.
Well, we're here. I'm Bob Moats, welcoming you to X's and Joe's, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 24, Program Expectations. What are reasonable expectations and how are they set? Recorded on the afternoon of Friday, January 31st, 2025. So, Bob, I almost forgot that today was inspection day at the Back Home Network.
Of course it is. Yes. Our 1 year review has been delayed a couple weeks, but we wanted to kind of, we know we have to go through the usual feedback of compliment sandwiches and all those sorts of things. Yeah. So we're glad we got the boss on, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Our special guest today is Jerod Morris, who is
Galen Clavio.
Yeah. Yep.
He did our 6 month. He did our 6 month.
Yeah. It's on a cycle, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jerod Morris, he's the Supreme Allied Commander, I guess, of the Back Home Network, and the host of Assembly Call podcast. And I guess you'd say he's the Brian Epstein of the X's and Joe's podcast. So
yes,
Jerod,
he is.
Welcome to the show.
It's awesome to be here. I'm so happy with what you guys have done and what you've brought to the network with the show. I remember it's fun thinking back to how the show came about and just some of the in-depth conversations that we have on Discord. And it's like, this should be on a podcast because this is great stuff. And to see how that's actually translated to audio and kind of the reaction that it's gotten and the loyalty of the listenership that you guys have built in a year is really awesome. And it's a testament, to the chemistry of your conversations and just your in-depth knowledge and ability to make great analogies that other people probably would not make has been really good. So I'm excited to be here because I really enjoy the show. And so it's fun to be on it.
Jerod, we just wanted to say we appreciate greatly everything you've done personally to make this happen and to kind of nursemaid us through the technical side and all sides and facets of doing this. You're a big key to this happening and its success. And we appreciate that greatly. And thank you for that.
Absolutely. It's working great.
Yep.
So Jerod, tell us a little bit about who Jerod Morris really is. Cause I don't think in the time I've known you, I've actually got, I knew you were at IU for a period of time, knew you were in Bloomington as a kid. I know a few things about you, but if you want to just tell us a little bit more about who Jerod is.
Oh boy, who am I? Well, right now I'm a dad of two incredible kids, so that's probably the most important part of my identity. But like so many, like you guys, like so many people who listen to this, I grew up a Hoosier. We moved to Bloomington in '84. My dad was part of Bill Mallory's staff, which a lot of people probably know. And so, if you can think about being a kid growing up at those impressionable ages, '84, I was 3 years old. And we lived in Bloomington until 1993 or 94. I don't remember exactly when we moved, 93 or 94, at which point we moved 2 hours north when my dad took a job, coaching for the enemy at Purdue. Although when you're a defensive backs coach and you've kicked Purdue's butt and their head coach wants you to be their defensive coordinator, you kind of have to take it. But from 84 to 93, we lived in Bloomington. And if you can think about, those impressionable ages from about 3 to 11 or 12 and being there for Anthony Thompson and Dave Schnell and Trent Green and all of those incredible IU football teams. And also, having, tickets 7 rows behind the IU bench for basketball games, wow. So my first memories of IU basketball are, going to games with Jay Edwards, and watching him. He was my first favorite player. And then obviously just that epic run, unfortunately didn't result in a banner, but that epic run during the Chaney years, those are my formative years as an IU basketball fan. And I think, there are a lot of us now, that are here kind of in middle age, talking about the team and just feel such an emotional connection to the team, because when we were growing up, not only was IU basketball just, at the epicenter of the college basketball universe, which can be kind of difficult to relay to younger fans because it feels like we've been on the outskirts of it, for so long now. But Indiana was really the epicenter of it, and that was kind of the last gasp of the Knight era, really. But man, it was a great time to grow up, and I think when that gets in your blood, it just never goes away. So even though we spent 4 or 5 years in West Lafayette, and I have nothing but good things to say about the town and the high school that I went to, there was nothing was ever going to take, that away for me in terms of my love for Indiana. And so, fast forward to now, and, here I still am living in Texas, but talking with you guys about Indiana basketball many, many years later. So it's always been something that's really special to me, and continues to be to this day.
Well, and having that very unique experience growing up. I think we've talked several times on the show about what we call it the end of the breaking away years. Yeah. And when we showed up on campus, basically Mike and I, the breaking away years ended the day I enrolled, I think. So
now we don't have to blame.
I have wide shoulders and will take whatever abuse is necessary for my sins. Yeah. But it was a special time, and we're just really glad you decided to come on, especially considering today is January 31st, 2025, and in a few short hours, there's another group that went from Bloomington to West Lafayette tonight. They'll be tipping off against the Boilermakers. So IU Purdue Day is always, it should be a state holiday 3 times a year, I think. We'll queue up Martha the Mop Lady at 7:30 for my son to watch and point yell IU at her the whole time. And because every time that I just have those memories when I was that age, when you saw Martha go on the Channel 4 screen, when they preempted the Brady Bunch for IU basketball, you just knew something special was going to happen in the world. Something that everything was right with the planet. And I want my kid to have that same excitement going in and just being able to be like, okay, this is an event.
Right. Yeah. And IU did have the better Farm Bureau lead in to the games than Purdue did. It's just my own opinion. But,
yes.
Yeah. Sousaphones are not that cool. Just
not that cool.
Hey, Bob, I have an observation. Do you sense that we have a possible Manchurian candidate problem in the network, given that 2 of the hosts actually grew up in a certain Tippecanoe County?
We did. I know.
Yeah.
Rival high schools, me and Galen.
Rival high schools. So, and you guys can be in the same room together. We get that as Terre Haute and Columbus kids. We understand how the rival high schools work. I would say that it is highly possible to go from a rival to another rival and back to the rival again. I feel like once you've lived in both worlds, you can take the best from both of them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I feel that in Galen and Jerod's case, that they can do that very adeptly and effectively.
Yeah, well, they have a different perspective, obviously. Like, when you actually immerse yourself in that fan base for, a certain number of years, then you can come back. It's like they can report back on exactly what the thoughts are going on the other side of the wall, so to say.
And I'd add this much. They survived northern Indiana, which is like surviving the frozen tundra of Siberia. Yeah. Like the winters up there are not the winters down here. And I mean,
the Gulag archipelago of Indiana.
Yeah, like Oklahoma, the wind comes swooping down the plain. They mean it. I mean, it's like you see the windmills, they're there for a reason. It's like that wind never stops. My wife comes from Rensselaer, so we get her. Her parents actually met at Purdue, so there's that element that I'll always have at least some warmness towards the construct of a Purdue University.
Yeah.
So anyway, that being said. Speaking of warmness, it's we're getting out of winter and getting into that springtime. I mean, right now it's 55 degrees and sunny in Columbus. The dog's outside, enjoying every moment, which means we're getting closer to t-shirt weather, but also that sweatshirt weather. And we know the perfect place for you to find that, which is Home Field Apparel. Looking for that vintage look that makes Home Field unique, regardless of the institution. We encourage you to check out our BHN title sponsor, Home Field Apparel. Mike, what are you seeing right now in Home Field?
I know they just dropped the hockey hoodies, and I think people should definitely check those out. They are pretty cool.
Those look awesome.
They even had schools I forgot that had hockey, like Arizona State, the Sun Devils. We do have a hockey team, and I totally forgot that was a thing out in the desert. But the designs are really cool, and yeah, I mean, I was one of those kids back in the 90s. My friend Sean, we would got really into hockey back around like when the Pittsburgh Penguins were dominant. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I have some jerseys still hiding somewhere in my closet, but I think I'm definitely going to take a look at some of the hockey hoodies that Home Field put out there. So definitely check those out and all the other great merch they have at homefieldapparel.com. And before we get going into the show, just a reminder, next week, what we have coming up next weekend, Bob.
You and I are going to be in Bloomington, and for the Back Home Network meetup.
Yep.
Mike, for me, it's a horrible trek of 45 minutes that I can basically do in my sleep. Mike, you have a little more tough time getting over there, I think.
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, I'll be flying out of Philly into Bloomington, and then I will be flying on Sunday back into Philadelphia during Super Bowl Sunday in Philly.
Oh my gosh.
That's going to be yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be flying back into Paris during the liberation or the last day in Saigon in 1970. Just the escape. So it'll be one or two of those that I'll be coming back to. So I'm looking forward to it.
What time does your flight land? Because that may be your saving grace. You may get to
I get in just before kickoff, so I think I'll be just a little bit safe. So
you might be okay. Be okay.
Yeah,
it's just if you got in after, it'll be your problem.
Yeah, and we're all looking forward to it. Jerod, I did see that unfortunately we won't be coming this year.
I will not be able to make it. I'm going to try and get up there in March actually for senior night if I can.
Okay.
So, great. I don't know if that's going to happen. Yeah, the travel just didn't really work out this year. And also after we planned it, because we just didn't have many options, I realized that the 8th is also the date of the dad-daughter dance that my daughter and I go to every year. And so at a certain level, it kind of came down to, okay, do I go to Bloomington and be at this awesome meetup and see all these great people, or do I disappoint my daughter and tell her that we can't do the dad-daughter dance this year? As much as I love you guys, I couldn't do that.
We don't.
And then plus there was some other issues that cropped up too, so it made it a little bit easier. But
we don't love ourselves that much to do that. It's and we'll, believe it or not, we will always be there. So this won't be. So exactly. We get it. We get it.
Yeah, we'll take care of things while you're gone, Jerod. I just got back from the ATM this morning, so Tonsoni's bail fund is squared away.
Oh, good.
So don't worry.
Good.
Yeah, we're all in.
Definitely make sure that you watch out for him.
Exactly.
For sure.
we have eyes on everyone.
Yep. Yes. All right. When we come back, we'll get started discussing program expectations next on X's and Joe's.
And welcome back to X's and Joe's. So we're here to talk really about what we should, how expectations are set. This as we kind of get into this. There's a process, I think, over years, decades, on programs' expectations that are established, and some of it's rooted in history, some of it's rooted in personnel, some of it's rooted in the efficacy of a fan base, the success of a fan base as well. I think sometimes relative to career or life in general. I think that expectations at certain higher level power institutions are definitely different than expectations at, let's say, your low major, high major, or mid major type schools. There's even hierarchies inside the high majors, inside Power Five, inside your large conferences that go into show it. I think you have this across all athletics. I mean, I think that if you talk about like in the state of Indiana. In Division III, I think Wabash and DePaul will have different expectations than many of the other D3 institutions in the state of Indiana. NAIA, Indiana Wesleyan, is going to look at things a little different than maybe some other schools as well. And that's just taking a pure Indiana approach to the conversation as a state. But I think as we kind of started, and Jerod, I kind of throw this out to you. The key question is, when you think about, and you've seen with your past, you've seen this uniquely set. Who do you think really sets that floor and that ceiling when you start thinking about a program at an institution? How what have you seen as to kind of how that tone gets set? Because I think if you look at IU football and IU basketball in, let's say, 1984, I think there were two vastly different ways that we looked at that.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think the tone. I think the tone is going to get set from the top, right? So look at IU football this season. The expectations were immediately different because of the tone that Curt Cignetti set when he came in. And even said, I want to change the way people think about Indiana football. And he did. It didn't take long. I mean, he even had people thinking differently about Indiana football after the first couple of weeks. Because it's like, oh, wait, we're playing a different style here. There's some attention to detail. This is serious football. We need to treat it as such. I think Bill Mallory did something similar in the 80s. The path to a turnaround was just a lot longer back then, which I've talked with my dad about with some frustration a little bit this year, where it's like, well, yeah, he was able to bring in, they basically had to start over and, build up with that first recruiting class that went 0-11 and kind of slowly but steadily get better. But there was still a seriousness level about it, that and a toughness about it that Bill Mallory brought that I think started to change the way that people thought internally. And then when that starts to emanate out, people start to feel differently about it externally. And that's the IU basketball that I grew up on. You knew that no one was a more stringent standard bearer for Indiana basketball than the coach of Indiana basketball, and that certain things were just non-negotiables and were going to be there when you watched a team. And I think that's really been the biggest difference, the phrase that often gets used talking about Indiana basketball is that we've been in the wilderness, for such a long time, with fits and starts and a few good seasons here or there. But, and unfortunately, I think this comes into real focus on days when we're playing Purdue, which they've certainly had some ups and downs, and they've never reached the pinnacle, which, makes them legitimately remain the butt of IU fans' jokes forever. But they have, to their credit, had a very consistent program identity and had a standard, that they adhere to. And what Purdue basketball is, and they recruit to it, and it's something fans can get behind and kind of know what to expect. And we don't really have that at Indiana basketball right now. And so I think fans struggle with it sometimes because it's like, hey, I know what I grew up on. And I feel like that's fair to expect at least some of that, like to understand what I'm going to see, to get kind of consistent competitiveness, to have a standard of excellence for how we're going to play. And yet it just hasn't been there consistently. And so you're left thinking, well, wait a minute, am I foolish for thinking about this, especially when, sometimes even the communication that's coming from the program doesn't seem to be holding itself to the same standard as, kind of what the marketing materials do. And this is something Galen has talked about a lot. And so I do think the tone, it comes from the top, it comes from the program itself, and fans are going to feed on that. But certainly I think when that butts up against what the program has shown that it can do historically, fans are like, but wait, we did this. Like, we had this, and it, fans weren't castigated for holding the program to the standard because the coach did it and the program itself did it. And so now why are we wrong for doing it? And then you kind of get in this weird feedback loop that we've been in, as IU fans and as an IU athletic department, certainly with basketball for a long time now, where everybody just feels frustrated with each other. But to me, that's because, Indiana is a program that has been searching for an identity, and, and it's not, it hasn't necessarily been, hey, the AD hasn't an identity for what Indiana basketball is going to be, and he's going to hire a coach that does that. It's almost been, we're just trying to find the coach. They can put their imprint on it, and it just hasn't worked, And so that has kind of led us to where we are now, where those great days are so long ago. And it does make you wonder, like, man, am I being unfair with expecting this? Do we need to just reset all the expectations? And I don't know. I mean, we might. But I think, what Curt Cignetti showed with IU football is things can turn around very quickly. And that tone from the top can be one that everybody gets behind very quickly when it's right. And when you have the person in place that's going to hold everybody accountable to it, and I think that's what IU basketball fans are longing for again. And for the reasons I just said and myriad other ones, we just haven't had that for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think the part you talked about, Jerod, that I see a lot in a lot of the research that I do around like programs and their performance and how the fans react to the performance and with their teams. The whole thing about like program history, like how much you won, like, and what your trophy case looks like how full or empty it is. That's probably the number one variable of, I would say, is like the organic variable that determines fans' expectations most regularly. I mean, there are other things that kind of go into that. I mean, like the program resources, like, how much NIL resources do you have relative to your rivals? Where do you expect to sit relative to your rivals? Are you the big brother, little brother, all that? I mean, there's a myriad other ones that, I've kind of found over time, but that one is like the big one. Like, are we a championship level program or are we not? That's like the basic sort of like coin flip, yes, no question. I think that fans kind of like basically inculcate in their own heads, like, okay, yes, we are, or no, we're not, but we're trying to get there. And so I think whenever you have that reality where you have some level of success in your past, but you're not actually doing it now, that's where the tension comes in. That's when you get all the friction within the fan base. And it really doesn't matter what sport it is, because I literally have gone to Peru before and just talked to guys on the street and asked them, hey, tell me about the football teams down here. And they'll say, okay, well, this team is, this good, and this one is, the bad one. And I'll ask them, who are the angriest fans in this country? And they'll immediately say, oh yeah, well, Team X is that. And I'll ask them, why is Team X fans mad? And invariably, they'll say something like, they used to win, but they don't anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny that we're having this conversation now this week, because there was a tweet that went around. I don't even know who it was from, but it was about North Carolina. And they were talking about Hubert Davis, who is now in year 4. And of course took North Carolina to the championship game. But now I think if they missed the tournament this year, they'll have missed it 2 times in his 4 years. And it was, well, this is unacceptable for North Carolina basketball. And all IU fans are like, yes,
we get it.
This is what we're talking about. And yet it feels like now we're kind of so far removed from that, where, I mean, honestly, getting to the NCAA tournament 2 times in 4 years is progress based on kind of what happened with the regime before, and even, kind of how things felt there at the end of the Crean era. And I think, the other thing, Mike, that I think goes into it with Indiana, because, so much of this is about, how these teams are tied up in kind of our personal identities. When you become a fan at a young age and there's an emotional investment in it, it does kind of become part of who you are and even how you see yourself. And we can say that that's kind of lame and it's silly to do that for a college sports team, but we're all tribal people, but we don't really live in a tribal society. So we kind of cosplay it with our sporting allegiances, but there's still like kind of deep seated, and you guys have talked about this, kind of human emotions that are driving this. And part of it with Indiana basketball specifically, I feel like, and, part of what you were talking about is, there was a way Indiana did things that made us feel like Indiana basketball was special, and it's not just with Knight. When Branch McCracken was here, the Hurricane Hoosiers, playing a fast tempo, we were at the forefront of it, and we were a standard bearer for basketball and what winning basketball looked like. Same thing with Bob Knight when he came in, and the motion offense and the way that we played defense. It's like, this is kind of a new way to do things, a new way to win. There's this great coach. And then you've got the fan support and assembly hall. And it's like, I am part of something special. This means something. We are important in the world of college basketball. People look to us. And so I think now to have 10 years where it's like, man, the way that we're playing feels outdated, and gosh, assembly hall doesn't buzz like it used to. And it's like, man, it's like this thing that used to feel special to me now is kind of just normal. And now there's like these new fans that are telling me I should just be okay with it. Like, I just think it creates this cognitive dissonance, especially for, for older fans, or even for people who buy into the idea of what Indiana basketball used to be and that it could be again, there's this cognitive dissonance that just doesn't go away, and it like rings in your head, and you don't because you want to be supportive of the players and the coaches. You know, we love this thing, and yet it's like, but if we just keep allowing it to go like this, it just gets further and further from what made it special. And, you know, it's like, I mean, it was such a treat for me to go to an Indiana basketball game and to be swept up in this thing where we really matter. And if I was to take my son to it now, I would tell him all the things that used to be, you know, but it's like when I was going to games in 93, we were 6-7 years removed from a national title. Now, you know, it's like, man, Dad, it's almost your entire lifetime. And so I think then it gets different because it's like, well, I'm not passing on the same thing to my kids as it was. And again, these things can seem silly, but I think they're all wrapped up in it. And it, you know, so I think everybody, you know, everybody needs to have more empathy with everyone. You know, I think the older fans need to have more empathy for the current program and not put the weight of 30 years of disappointment on every single thing that they do. But also there should be some understanding like, hey, we're not holding up the end of the bargain or the standard that we said and that you expect, and we can work better to do that. And unfortunately, a lot of times it feels like when it takes this long, now everybody's shouting past each other and now everybody's frustrated, and it just feels like everybody's like off in their own corners. And that's not what it was. You know, that's not what I became a part of in the beginning. I just think everybody gets frustrated by that.
I feel you hit something very important, which is the frustrations of 30 years. And it's this almost thing of, you got to imagine we're being caught in the wilderness with, you know, Moses here. And you're now mad at the current crop of situation. And did the leaders up front not understand what we've been through for these last 30 years, wandering around Sinai lost and relying on manna from heaven and all that to be able to subsist? And this whole thing of just penning up my middle-aged frustrations with my alma mater, you know, onto a bunch of 18 to 22-year-olds is not really fair, because it's only you can only control what's ahead of you. You can't control what's happened behind you. Yeah. And the one thing you can do with these past circumstances and situations is realize, and this is, I think, a lot of what Mike in particular has done, you know, with his research, with the research that he's done and the levels that he's gone with this, is to say, okay, this is how you get out of the loop. This is how things are evolving. And, you know, one reason I got into basketball the way that I did was to try to figure out some of these questions. Like, what's the world look like after motion offense? I was talking to another coach recently, and we said, when we got in the game, we were doing 3-2 alignments. That's 3 guys in the perimeter, 2 guys on the blocks. And then we went to 4 out, 1 in. And now we're all running 5 out at, you know, younger levels. And the reason for this is, you know, the game has evolved to such a level. You know, you're not packing zones in anymore, because you'll get killed from the time the kids are 10 through the pros. You get killed if you try to put everybody in the paint and say, don't go here. You know, you'll beat some teams that you're supposed to, but against really good 4th grade and up, they're going to have enough range and shooting to hit you and to knock you out. So how we teach the game is different than it was when I first started 20 plus years ago, almost 30 years ago. But all that being said, you can't put that much pressure on a program to just have all the past failures and then using that as an evaluative tool. What we have to do is you have to frame it, though, in an area in an area where it's like, okay, if we are this type of program, if we want to be a national contender, then we don't look to the past, we look to what's actually happening. Mm-hmm. And that's when you look at the question of, okay, so the honeymoon phase through to the first regression, what happens during those times? Do you extend? Do you not? How do you build your roster? What type of offense, what type of defense are you playing? What's your philosophy? What's your identity? All those questions that we're asking now are rooted in the present, not rooted in, boy, I remember in 1987, we did this. Why don't we do this again? Or, boy, remember in 2002 when Mike Davis, blah, blah, blah. Or Tom Crean, those early stages with him. And it's one thing to kind of say, okay, you know, time may not be flat in this situation. There's going to be different changes, different adjustments. But it's a thing where study where we are for expectations. If you want to meet that level, you know, start asking questions that are befitting a North Carolina or a Duke or a Kentucky who has gone through a very similar. Their drop off wasn't nearly as stark as the one that we've seen. But if you talk to their fan base, you know, they were definitively not happy a year ago at this time, and they made changes. and weren't exactly happy with the change that resulted in the change. And now you're not hearing a whole lot of chirping now because they seem to be pretty pleased with what's happened.
Right.
So there's a lot to be said here for being in the moment and knowing where you are. You don't live in the past. You treasure your past, but you look at the present. And that's how when you're setting the expectations, it's okay to have those high expectations, because nobody, if you're suggesting Minnesota, if you're suggesting Iowa, if you're suggesting Missouri, that line of schools there that have the expectations they have, which aren't the same as even a Purdue, I would add.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that, when it comes to the expectations, and there always seems to be a debate, and this is something you see across like all of college sports, especially when like a team or program is going through some kind of like like decline in their performance. You'll see a debate of like, okay, where should we set them? And I think there's always a problem with that, in the sense that expectations get set much more early and organically than what people assume. Again, it's based upon things that sometimes happened like decades ago. And unfortunately, there's not an Ozempic for fan expectations. Like, there's nothing you can take that's going to make you just say, okay, I took this pill and now I'm totally good with going to the tournament once every like 2 or 3 years. I'm fine with that. And so, and that kind of becomes, sort of the problem you get in these debates, is that, as Jerod pointed out, is that, fans do kind of go into their little tribes. And unfortunately, like what I've noticed is that it tends to kind of go along those lines of what we talked about before in a prior episode about the cheerleader version of fans and the stockholder critical version of fans. And every fan base has both of those types. And frankly, like every fan themselves has a little bit of both in each of them. It's just that there's obviously some people that are more extreme on one end and the other. And it's typically the people that are on those more extreme ends that tend to be the people that go after each other on social media and other message boards and all that. And so I think that's sort of the thing I always try to remind people, is that everyone that goes into those kind of debates essentially has the same goal. Everyone wants to win. It's just that there's different reactions to not winning. And there's a legitimate debate about, okay, once your team is not hitting the mark, what do you do? And that really doesn't have anything to do with expectations, because I'm a pretty high expectation fan, I would say, compared to most. But Bob, have you ever seen me like just go completely like rage monster at a game or on a coach when things weren't going well?
And over 30, I can now say over 30 years now,
yes,
right, Mike?
We can now, yes.
I can now say over 30. I've never seen you go rage monster on anybody.
Okay.
God, that'd be great to see, though.
Yes.
I'm afraid of it. I mean, you're talking we're talking like it's Vesuvius time, man. I don't want to see it. I want to hear about it.
Maybe something that happens next weekend we could bring it out.
Let's do it.
We'll see. But again, like, here's one of the things I think that kind of becomes a little bit of a problem. People think that the expectations are the problem, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's what you do about the expectations that's the problem. Like, I know people that have lower expectations than me and my teams, but they're much less patient about when those expectations get hit. Like, I have a friend, he's like, he's an IU fan. He says, look, I don't expect to get to the tournament, or I don't expect to win national championships right now. But if by year one, they're not like showing a really, efficient offense, well, I'm going to get really pissed off. And I was like, well, you just got there, right? Yeah. Like, you just got the team, you just got the roster. I mean, you have to give a little bit of time. But then I kind of like surpass him at some point, because I'm like actually in the note of, no, when you're the second most valuable brand in college basketball, I do think that, getting to Final Fours is not completely ridiculous expectation. Whereas for him, that's not the case. So I think there's a tendency to wrap expectations as the source of the problem in these conversations. And I just don't think that's always the case.
There's also the idea of identity and what are your non-negotiables as a program. And I think that, I think these evolve over time. Sometimes they're spoken, sometimes they're not spoken. And to me, this is really, this is where the tone comes from the top. Athletic director, and I think, athletic director, is kind of in charge of understanding what's that going to be and making sure that stays in place across coaches. Or if the athletic director isn't doing it, then obviously, whoever power brokers are behind there for the program, them making sure that this happens. But I think, what are we as a program? Because I think take Indiana fans, for example. I think Indiana fans will have a lot of patience for a program and a coach if there's a toughness, right? And if there's a style of basketball that they look at and see, okay, I understand what we're trying to do. I think this is, whatever the modern context is that we're talking about, I understand what we're doing here. And I think you can look at this across sports, right? Like the Pittsburgh Steelers, take them. They've been consistently successful. They're now kind of at this place where it's like, man, we're winning 9 games a year, but we're not really going too far over. But there's still there's those non-negotiables are still there in terms of, hey, we're playing tough, hard-nosed defense. We're built a certain way. The way we play football reflects the fans of this city. When they get outside of that, I've noticed because, there's several people I follow that are Steelers fans, like Mike DeCourcy and other people. Mm-hmm. And you can see when they get outside of those parameters, the frustration gets a lot more because it's like, now hold on a second. I will be patient, but there are some non-negotiables that I thought when I entered into this kind of unspoken fan contract, I thought I was going to show up and see a team that was going to play hard and play tough and play a certain style. And so when you're losing and the things that you thought were non-negotiables aren't there, like for an Indiana fan to go into Assembly Hall and give up 60 points in the first half of a game and be down by 30 points that's a non-negotiable. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And that's going to make your head spin.
Guys not running the floor. Guys
right.
not running the floor.
Yes. And I think part of it, for Indiana fans over the last 10 years has been, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. There was always, we ran smart offense and we've had good shooters and, and is that kind of stuff a little bit silly? Maybe. But that's kind of what we came to expect from an Indiana basketball team. And so when you're losing and those things aren't there, and I think this is important, you feel as a fan like there's no one holding those standards or there's no one that's saying, now hold on, this is a non-negotiable and we're going to make sure that we do this. Where instead the messaging is, hey, we're doing our best and, this is kind of just what you have to accept. It's like, well, no, I'm willing to be patient. I'm willing to support, but there's, I want to see some stuff on your end too, that this is actually the Indiana basketball that I signed up for. Because if not, it's like, what is that? And so I think that disconnect has been there for the past 8 to 10 years, and obviously social media exacerbates all of this, in terms of people who kind of communicate on there, and the tone, I think has gotten worse because of that. But I think the underlying feeling is, there were certain things I was promised. The team is going to be more important than the individual, which is why we don't have names on the back of the jerseys. And yet sometimes when I watch it, I don't get that sense. And again, it just comes back to this ringing cognitive dissonance that fans have. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, an outlet for that sometimes, and it's a more loud and accessible outlet to the players and coaches, is to be able to broadcast that stuff publicly. Where before you might have been just, texting a friend or, talking about it at a bar or shouting, at home.
TV.
And so some of that stuff is filtered out. But what's underneath there is I was promised, some certain non-negotiables, and those aren't even there anymore. And I don't even feel like there's someone that's kind of watching over the store to make sure that stuff comes back. And I think that's where then you get this whole line of, well, heck, I mean, I don't have any confidence this is going to happen, so I'm just going to root against the team to lose out to guarantee that the coach is gone. Like, that's where, man, now the cognitive dissonance is just, going crazy, and you're saying crazy stuff because, but we don't need to go there. And yet some fans feel like they have to, because it's like this thing that was once special to me. I don't feel like there's anybody watching out for it. So I disagree with that wholeheartedly. Right. I can empathize with the feelings that lead people to get there. And that is not just on fans. That is a failure of leadership, and just a reflection of modern day communication and society that kind of gets all mixed up in there. So I strongly, vehemently disagree with it. But I think when you get to that point, you've got to take a step back and say, whoa, This isn't just a person choosing to be unhinged and yell at something they love. There are some real fundamental things driving people starting to feel this way.
I guess that's where a lot of this is. I'm not a moral judge myself. I mean, I have my own stuff to worry about. Everybody else can kind of do their own thing. And I can again, like you, Jerod, I can see the empathy. I have empathy for why things have gone to this point. And to me, it's more, I think Mike and I have looked at this more as an indicator, right, Mike, that it's an indicator less than it is actually something that we say, yes, no, tastes great, less filling. No, it's more like, this is something that when IU or any fan base gets to that point, and I think people they hear the booing or they see the stuff on social media. I don't concern myself. I get that it's a problem. It's something that it's a definite indicator. It's more when you see empty seats. Mm-hmm. It's more when you just see that people aren't going and that they're just not engaged, or you talk to your friends who are diehard IU fans and they're like, I'm not watching tonight. I got a thing to do. Or, I checked the score on my phone and realized I don't want to go back and watch it on DVR, so I deleted it. When you start seeing that dropout, that passivity, which, when you're winning, everybody jumps on board. Now it's an event. We saw that with Indiana State last year. Terre Haute, Indiana exploded. It's been sitting on this energy for 40 plus years, just
as much as Terre Haute can explode.
And hey, it's a wild little place, Mike. You grew up but I can tell you that
it should be on the sign when you enter Terre Haute. It's a wild little place.
But I just think Terre Haute, and especially for graduates of Indiana State who hadn't had anything to really cheer about since 1979, and I can say that, but for my family and everybody I know from that era in my parents' life, that it was special for them, and that's the plus of social media was I got to see them interact on Facebook. They got to interact together and be like, oh boy, this is so exciting. We're going to watch our Sycamores tonight, and we just can't wait to see them play. But I think that additional, what else is expected? And I think that's a big nail on the head as to, we expect a certain brand of basketball to be played. We expect a certain brand of any sport to be played. I can say as a Reds fan, it's never felt like Cincinnati Reds baseball in the last 10 years. And definitely not what it felt like when I was a kid, when even in 1990, there's not a Pete Rose that sits out there, and you love him, hate him, be in between. There's no real, there's a definite in between with him actually. But, as flawed as he was as a human being, the guy still would, as he said, walk through hell in a gasoline suit to play baseball. And so he sets an expectation for Reds players. Like, we want players who feel that way, the same way that Pete Rose did, and are willing to do whatever it takes to win. And that, I think, to me, has been kind of the thing that, and when we kind of go, I think I'm going to throw it to Mike, then we'll kind of get into a quick break here. But, as we kind of talk about this portion, that there is more than just winning and losing. Like, we won a lot on some of the regimes, but it wasn't necessarily what we thought was Indiana. It didn't reach to the same level of Indiana basketball. It didn't feel like it was sustainable. Yeah. And I'm talking about Kelvin Sampson here. It never felt like it was sustainable under Kelvin. And as much as I enjoyed watching those teams play in so many ways, there was just that other thing there's other things that were lingering around and that were kind of indicative of that at Indiana University. But there are those expectations past winning and losing that we just expect to see from our student, from the teams that we follow. And at the very least, we can recognize effort, I think, as fans. Fans recognize what true effort really is.
Yeah. And I think, we're looking at sort of the exacerbating factors of like, okay, why are the fans this mad that they're taking to social media and doing all this stuff? And obviously, we can talk about just the wins and losses, and there's obviously a lot of qualitative stuff that we've said about, the style of play, whether they're diving on the floor and look like they're giving the effort that fans have been accustomed to in the past. I still think that one of the hidden drivers, and it's perfect that we're having this conversation today on the Purdue game, is that if you're behind where your rivals are as a sports fan, that's one of those like hidden sort of it's almost like having like a lump of hot cold is dropped into your system and it just like burns you, even though you can't see it. Purdue having that much success, I can tell you, is like just in the research that I see, that irrespective of like sports, irrespective of the teams and all that, just knowing like how fan psychology works, having your little brother have that much success relative to you over a period of time in a sport that you're considered to be historically dominant in, will have a very, very caustic effect on a fan base.
Mm-hmm.
If Texas just completely died in football and just for like 40 years did nothing, and they had to watch like A&M just completely dominate them, and I'm looking over
Yes,
and like one of the
please.
plots.
Yeah.
Yes,
You're going to be
please.
ecstatic. You'll be ecstatic.
I would live in a very happy
And the
house.
The happiest house on earth.
Not just him in the household. Yes, if that happened at Texas, knowing how Texas football fans are and what they think of themselves relative to the sport of football, then exactly the level of antipathy that can like build up in a fan base.
Of course, yes.
They didn't create their own network to watch a water polo.
Right.
They didn't create their own cable network to watch water polo or
exactly.
crew.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, Mike, just to piggyback on what you said, there's definitely an element of it where it's like, looking up at Purdue and just, and obviously they haven't, gotten the big prize, but
they came close.
It's it's the success they're having, but it's also the way they're doing it with this coach like Matt Painter, who is a really likable guy and talks about basketball in a way that Indiana fans are just like, oh my God. Like you listen to him talk and he will educate you. And like I remember, and obviously there are tons of differences between Bob Knight and Matt Painter, but I used to remember watching the Bob Knight would do those pregame chalk talks, in his show. And like you would learn stuff about basketball and you felt like, wow, I could just listen to this guy talk hoops, and seeing what they do with in-state guys and the way they play. And you understand that the Purdue non-negotiables are there's going to be a certain level of toughness, a certain level of, just competitive fight that we're always going to bring. Our home court advantage means a ton, and it's always going to be tough to play here. And look, the style may change a little bit, but, we're still going to be a team that plays smart, modern offense. Like Indiana fans, look at that. It's like, oh my gosh, that's the basketball that I fell in love with.
And you
hate it because you just want to yell at them, and we have all the same insults that we have for Purdue, but now it feels like all the time we're caveating it with, they've been more successful than us for 20 years and they play a cool style and they do it the way that we wish we were doing it. But it's like, I just want to go back to hating them and feeling like we're doing things better.
I have to make fun of their haircuts. I have to just make fun of their haircuts. That's all I've got. I'm down to they don't have good hair. They don't have a decent barber in West Lafayette. That's all I'm stuck with now. That pisses me off.
That matters. It really does.
And now Michigan's doing it and other things. So
exactly. Hey, before we go to break, just on that note, did you see Bozic's pod today or yesterday? The title of it.
What is
Alex's?
it?
What did it say?
And the title of it was something like Purdue is what IU used to be.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
Matt Painter grew up as an IU fan watching those teams.
I joked that like if you go back into that like 1993 era, that like graduating class, if you went across all of the state, the one guy that probably had more IU memorabilia on his wall was Matt Painter.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So when we come back, we're going to kind of delve into the idea that this is that expectations and it's not just a one-way street with fans and programs having it on their players and coaches, but there's also, I think, a bit of a social contract between those coaches and players and their fan bases, and some of the evolution to that and kind of where we are with that, maybe within IU and other fan bases and just across the board as well. So when we come back from X's and Joe's.
Welcome back to X's and Joe's. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats and Jerod Morris. So we talked about expectations in terms of their formation. Now, I guess we'll explore how they apply to the teams themselves. I guess, Bob, you had sort of like alluded to it before. The framing I've always kind of thought of around this question is very similar to Rousseau's notion of social contract.
Yeah.
Basically, here's what we expect from you, and this is what you can expect from us at the same time in exchange. And so it's just a very basic, poli-sci 101 concept. So in thinking of that and thinking of that as the framework, do you think that is maybe the proper way to look at this, Bob? Is that, it's sort of like a transactional relationship? Or is it something a little bit deeper in terms of like, it goes beyond just like, I'm going to give you X numbers and in exchange, you're going to give me Y return?
One of the things like fans, because I think you've kind of hit this idea of transactional. And I think when you're looking at it from a fan's perspective, like we see this with recruiting all the time. Kid doesn't pick your school and you're like, well, why wouldn't you want to go to the happiest place on earth? That's like deciding you want to go to, I don't know, a landfill versus going to Disney World. Why would you go to this dung heap over here versus going to the Space Mountain? And it's like, well, it is at this level when you start looking at it as players and coach. I think Jerod hit this at the beginning. Like when the guy you've been kicking his butt for years calls you and gives you a promotion and offers you more money, better chance for your family, and maybe a chance to, again, improve your craft, you're going to take the promotion. Doesn't matter if it's your rival or not. So if you're looking at this viscerally as a fan, well, you traitor, you turncoat, how could the Morris family do this to the Hoosier family? You should have just stayed in your place. No, it doesn't work that way. It's like,
I think that's what I said to my dad at dinner table when he came and told us that. It's a very, very awkward conversation.
I got to go where?
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Did an Indiana State call? Did a Ball State call? Can we go to Muncie? Do we have to live there? I can hear it. Yeah, I gotcha. Dad gets a promotion.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it is very much you're looking at kids with professional aspirations, not just in the sport, but across the board. They're looking for the best fit for them culturally. They're looking for the program for what checks their boxes. And if one program A, program B, we've heard people like Jeff Rabjohns talk about these are 51-49 propositions. Oftentimes, you never really know what the tipping point is. It's why you want to shove all in on recruitments. Why you want to, if you really want a kid, you better show that kid you want him. So that I guess there is that investment portion on that end, which is like for them, it may be more of a transactional thing. I think the problem is if they start expecting fans to just blind loyalty. Well, don't you understand what we're doing for you? And not respecting. And I think this is true in fandom across all levels of you have to pay to come to a game and it's not your kid you're watching. If I take my kid to a Colts game, and we all three of us go up there, we're talking this is well in, we may at the end of the day, once we consider all the expenses and everything we've done, we may be going somewhere. We're closer to $1,000 than we are to $150, and so I'm investing a great deal, not just my time, which is valuable, but I'm also dragging a kid into into Lucas Oil, and I expect to at least expect to see a decent product on the field. And I think that's kind of that thought process where it's like, we're investing money into this, and that's just base level investment. That's just a casual fan going to a game versus someone who, okay, let's say that you have commas instead of decimal points on your varsity club points, and you're closer and closer and closer to the floor, and you've been investing in this, and because your dad and your grandfather invested in it, you're going to see this a little differently. So it's like you can understand in that situation that it's like that's where the social contract kicks in, is that, yeah, we appreciate you being here and going to our institution, and I hope you enjoy the popsicle that we gave you. But now, especially in the NIL level, it's more than a popsicle. It's more, we're putting real comma-driven money into this program, and you are telling us how we should be. And I can understand where there's a little bit of that sort of transaction. Is that like you don't want to make that fully transactional, because I think in that situation, the one with the more emotional investment is going to win out in the conversation, and whether that's with a coach or whether that's with a young man or young woman who's playing the sport, that person who's actually behind it, this is who they are. They've wrapped themselves in this identity. They've decided not to buy a bigger boat so they can go to your games in a certain way and support your program. It's not that you owe them not a transaction only, but at the very least, there's a social contract that we expect this and you expect this.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I also think something that is exacerbating it is, there used to be a firewall between the players and the coaches and what happened on the field and the reactions from the fans. And so, social media, the lack of gatekeepers for a fan like me, a fan like us to just start a podcast and be able to put our thoughts out there on the team, good and bad. There are great elements of that. No question about it. We've gotten to learn more about players in certain ways, all that stuff. But this firewall is now gone, where in the past, it's like, okay, you play a game, maybe it doesn't go that well, but you're not hopping on Twitter and seeing what everybody's saying. You're more, your group, because, again, and when players would go out in public, most people aren't going to just go say something negative to them in person, because the way that we treat people online is way different than what we would ever say in person. But now they're privy to all of those thoughts, and the negative stuff obviously gets communicated way louder than the positive stuff. And, one reason why I hate this really for Indiana and its fans is it almost feels like there's this kind of social experiment going on with IU, where there's how many college programs have a bigger gulf between expectations and stated goals and actual results and kind of historical expectations in Indiana? And so now you're tossing all that into this mixture with social media. And so much of when people say like Indiana fans are crazy, and Indiana fans are crazy, that was always kind of meant in a good way, but now it's kind of taken on this bad context because the bad stuff is so loud on social media and it gets to players and they read it and they internalize it. And same thing with coaches. And that's got to suck for them to read, whereas in the past, it was just like, okay, we're going to go play a game. Let's all retreat. We're not hearing all the bad stuff really that you're saying about us. And we're going to show back up. And the people who were there in the arena want to be there and they're cheering us on and we're all in this together. And now it's like just this negative feedback loop just reinforces itself faster and faster and faster, and you end up with, oh my God, if the start of this Maryland game goes poorly, what's going to happen? And an Indiana fan, Indiana really is almost at the apex of this. I see it a lot down here living in Dallas with the Cowboys, where they had now the longest drought of going to a conference championship game of any team in the NFC by a lot. And the fans are like, yes, we had all this success back in the 90s, and you keep telling us we're the most valuable franchise and we're going to win, and the results just haven't been there, and so it all builds up. And so, I think, to your point, Bob, I think not having that firewall anymore between the games and the performances and all of the fan reaction. Again, there's some positives to it, but I think there are also a lot of negatives to it. And I think everybody as a fan, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, because, I've had a lot of people who have said to me over the last 3, 4, 5 years, man, your tone on the show has really changed from in the beginning, because back in the beginning when we started, the assembly call, I still had the utmost belief that Indiana basketball would get back to what it was. Of course we would. And so I even had this bit where I would predict that we would win every game, even if it seemed ridiculous. That was kind of my role. And I just don't genuinely feel that way anymore, because year after year after year, it's like, well, I just don't viscerally have that same faith and confidence, but yet I've chosen to put myself in this role where I'm putting my thoughts and feelings out there, which to me, kind of led to the nadir last year, where we're in February of the season having what I thought was a very honest and accurate conversation about the team and the coaching staff, but we're calling for the coach, saying that, the coach should be removed and having a fourth year isn't a good thing. I don't disagree with any of that stuff, but it's like, man, I'm a fan of this program. Why, is it like, I know I can put it out there and we have an audience and we should be honest to them, but is that the right role for a fan to have? This isn't like my main source of income. It's not my job. Do this because I like it. Why? And I've really tried to spend a lot of time thinking about this, because you can make excuses about it and say like, well, I'm justified to say whatever I want to say. It's okay. But what's your ultimate goal? Is it to be, a fan that's, trying to help encourage the team? And does that help? And at the same time, well, can't the team just be a little bit more mentally tough and not look at this stuff and not care what I say? Why does that matter? I'm doing this for the fans. And so I go round and round with it. And I don't know, and I do think it's important for fans to think about that and think about what they're putting out there in the public, because not having that firewall between all those thoughts and what the team is doing, it does, I think, change the contract. And that's why I've never believed in booing, right? I think if you're going to go to the game, you're asking those guys for those 2 hours to give everything they can to win. Well, if you're going to go and you're a fan, you should give everything for them to win. Don't boo. Come later, we can talk about all this stuff, not during the game. Right. And I know people disagree with that. So I think it's a weird time to be a player and a coach. It's a weird time to be a fan. But I do think these things are important to think about, because that whole relationship and the whole feedback loop has kind of changed a little bit. And media is one thing. They have their job, and people like Zach Osterman who are, trying not to necessarily be a fan, they're just reporting. That's one thing. But if you're a professed fan of the team, what is the line between, hey, I'm holding them to the standards that I think Indiana basketball should be held to, but I'm also trying to be supportive while they try to hold themselves to those standards. And now I'm saying the non-negotiables that aren't there. But wait, are the non-negotiables not there because I'm part of this negative feedback loop? And it's like, I go round and round in my head with this all the time, and talk about cognitive dissonance. It's just been ringing in my head for the last year and a half. But I think it's important. It is a new era in a lot of ways because of social media, because of NIL, all of this stuff. And I don't think it's fair to just say, hey, team, you've got to deal with this better. Like, maybe as fans, there are certain ways that we can conduct ourselves and choices we can make that help that.
And I would agree with that. I think, and I'm just going to say this now because, and I don't know if it's happened. I've seen enough on Twitter just to go ahead and say, if you or anyone is sending a death threat over this crap,
well, that's ridiculous.
Cease immediately. And the fact that we feel like we have to say that from time to time just goes to show that when you drop this type of conversation into the entire ether and just have people going and talking about, just anybody can talk to anybody on the internet. And the question is, how do you not listen to some of the voices? How do you filter those voices out? And I think I'm going to go back on an institutional thing that maybe an expectation we should start having. And IU is unique, I think, in many respects, because I feel like this fan base was one of the first to really figure out what the internet was.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Pegram made a career. I remember Mike Pegram when he had a day job. I knew him when he had a day job.
Yeah.
And, and they kicked him out of his office, and I took over we took over the building he was in. True story. So that I remember the day that he said, I'm going to quit my day job because this is too much for me to do as a side hustle. And he figured out how to make a living at it. And kind of again, and I don't think he knew he was creating a brave new world, that he was the trailblazer who's going to get bloodied and battered and beaten into the ground. and still was a very hell, you go on the golf course with him, you're just golfing with some dude from Columbus. I mean, that's really what it came down to. But I go back to that over the, and what you've done, Jerod, with Assembly Call, what Alex Bosich has done with Inside the Hall, all of these, how much just, and we've gone to the point, honest to God, we're the most meta fan base on the face of the earth. We talk about, all of us talking about us sometimes more than we actually talk about what we're talking about.
Yes.
It's bonkers. We love it. It's a weird sense of community. It's almost like something out of a Tina Fey written script, I have to admit. But I think at the end of the day, we value the people. We value the people that are invested in everything that we're doing. And I think that it goes back to this problem that, where it's like, we want what's best for the program. And sometimes we may saying something like, we believe the program needs a change, in my estimation, has always been a lot different than you suck or putting out a yard sign in front of a coach's house. Mm. One is bullying and abuse. The other one is trying to analyze what's going on and saying, I see this now as we're hearing conversations, we're hearing rumbling, we're going to address them, and we can see where this is. And I'm at this camp right now. And I think the key component for all of us is having an open mind meaning that you're able to change your mind. The words "I was wrong," and we're all three married happily. We all know what, and sometimes the key to the happy marriage is saying the words "I was wrong," and not just saying,
even though we weren't. Am I right?
Exactly. Exactly. Even though I wasn't wrong, I'm going to say it because I'm going to be the bigger person. I want to survive. But no, it's more than that, which is realizing that you were, and then being able to say, okay, well, we were wrong about this. I was wrong about this. And I think so many times on the internet, when you start hiding behind certain things, the words "I was wrong" would never even dawn on certain people to say. Yeah. Because they don't have the accountability of their face, their name, their identity of who they are being put behind it.
Yeah. Social media, you're right, Bob and Jerod, is that it's such a change to how the sports world is, I guess, how they analyze the games ongoing. Like in my research, I would say one of the biggest variable changes has been social media in terms of like, take a look at the length of honeymoons. Mm-hmm. I used to have honeymoons like pegged at, let's say, a certain average number of years based upon, depending upon the program and things like that. I could say, okay, I think this coach is probably going to get about 24 months. Now with social media, that completely changes things. It's because now the negativity can spark up, quicker. And there's always been that trade-off when it comes to the kind of program you have. In that social media can be an accelerator in either direction. It can, if you're at a big program, mm-hmm. it can be a rocket ship to the sky. Mm-hmm. If you're doing well. If you're also at that same big program and things going poorly, then it's a rocket ship right into the ground. And so that's typically the trade-off. It's like you summarize the trade-off, in terms of the research. It's like high intensity, high expectation fan bases tend to lead to more money, larger crowds, more media attention, bigger honeymoon bumps in terms of, recruiting and things like that. I mean, that's all the positive stuff. But once the honeymoon's over, then it completely flips. Then it's like, if things are going poorly, then what you said happens. You can start to get like all the negativity starts, leaking out. And then that just accelerates the departure of the coach. So it's really kind of hard, just to gauge the fact that the bigger the fan base you have, the more nuts you're going to have in it. It doesn't mean the actual number of lunatics in your fan base is by ratio different than what it is at a smaller fan base. It's just, if you have a larger fan base, just you're going to have a larger number of them. So it's, if you think about it, message board geniuses on Twitter, would that awesome. Exist if there are only 3 or 4 toxic fan bases in the country?
No. Nope.
I mean, it's a great follow. By
the way, Purdue wins. Purdue wins. I'm just going to say it. Go okay. Pause the podcast. Go to Message Board Geniuses right now. Scroll back to the one, the most recent one about Purdue's fan base, and just say,
"Yeah,
we at least we have that."
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's the one. I would say lunacy is the one true in college sports. It's one of the few truly Marxist projects that we've ever had. It's so well distributed across college sports that if Marx were alive, he would scream in delight about how evenly distributed we have nutsos within each show, within each program. Yes, the proletariat is conquered. The Gini coefficient is 0.
One other thing I want to say too is I think, there's a certain way that you can look at expectations. And some people frame it as expectations are a privilege, and some people look at it as expectations are a burden. And I think for a long time at Indiana, it felt like the expectations are a privilege. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a certain standard that we have here for how we play basketball. There's a certain standard for winning, again, going back to the non-negotiables. And so when you come to play here, this is part of the expectations, and all great programs have these. There was a great quote I was reading from Bam Adebayo about the Miami Heat recently. And he was basically talking about how, hey, look, if you're going to come here you're going to play for a coach that's going to hold you accountable. You're going to be annoyed by it, but there are certain ways that we're going to do things. And he was basically just saying, like, this is just what's expected of you. And if you come and do it, you'll become the best that you can be. And our, fans are going to expect it. And I think, again, part of what is, all wrapped up in this cognitive dissonance that IU fans have, and something maybe that we're all struggling with, is it feels like that's been flipped. And that now the expectations are a burden. It's like, gosh, national media are telling us no coach is going to take that job because the fans are crazy, and if you guys don't win at a certain level, which is always overrated, and they get it wrong because it's not just about the winning. It's about how the team is playing, and there's different levels of patience based on how you play and, what kind of team you're putting on the floor, but whatever. It's like, well, no coach is going to want to do that. And now, you're putting all this pressure on the players and they can't possibly have any confidence. So it's like, it's been flipped. And even some of the comments that Mike Woodson has made, honestly, like, he pays lip service to it. But then when you really get down to it, it's like, it feels like those expectations are a burden. And it's like, gosh, boy, this really has changed. I used to feel like I was part of something special because I had these expectations that helped, maintain the program. And now it's being flipped around on me like I'm the one who's wrong. But I was told to have these expectations. What do I do? And again, this isn't an excuse to go say whatever you want on social media. I think you have to, as a fan, take personal responsibility for what you say publicly and what you say privately. Because if it's in public, it can get to players and coaches, and every negative thought you have doesn't need to get to them, right? And so I think everybody needs to remember that. But I think the great programs and the programs that live up to high expectations view them as a privilege, not a burden. And I think Indiana fans are frustrated because it feels like the program has lost its way to where those expectations are a burden. And again, then you see a guy like Curt Cignetti come in and he wants it. Give me the high expectations. I want you to raise your expectations. You think we can do this? Raise them again. Raise them again. And he doesn't seem like a guy who's then going to make excuses for it when they don't live up to those expectations. And I think that's what Indiana fans want.
Kurt,
it's like, don't just push this off on me. Like, let me know that it's okay for me to expect this and that you're working toward it. Not that I'm the reason why it's not happening. So, and so that disconnect, I think when you get to a disconnect between the program and the fan base like that, it kind of becomes untenable, and it's really unfortunate because it doesn't need, everybody wants the same thing, and yet no one's really viewing it from each other's perspective to be able to get there.
Yeah. One of the problems I've always noted about the argument to lower expectations is that even if you had the blood magic to make it happen, you wouldn't want it to happen because all the trade-offs that come with it are things that 99% of fans would never want to have happen. Like passion and expectations are inextricably linked. So if tomorrow your program just decided, okay, we're just not going to expect much, the most likely outcome is that you're going to have a very empty arena because, again, it's just human psychology. Unless you're a masochist, human beings tend to not invest more time and energy in things that they know are just about to get worse.
Or a Browns fan.
Or them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, and we know, like, putting them on my nerdy HR performance hat, like all the research we have around expectations demonstrates that high expectations tend to lead long-term to actually higher performance. Mm-hmm. And low expectations tend to lead long-term to lower expectations. I mean, it's such a commonly found phenomenon in organizational psych that there's actually terms for it. I mean, on the high side, it's called the Pygmalion effect. On the low side, it's called the Gallon effect. We'll, of course, post this on the show notes when we're done. If you want to, if you really want to nerd out and go into the white papers around around organizational performance, but it's true. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand and I wanted to bury the teams I didn't like in permanent mediocrity, the first wish I would make is to have my rivals lower their expectations. Mm-hmm. Because we've seen it ourselves. Remember back in December, or I guess late November, during the football game against Purdue on social media, what were things you saw IU fans posting related to Coach Walters? Please, God, let him get a lifetime contract. Please keep him. Make sure
We're donating to the John Purdue Club tonight.
John Purdue Club. We'll get the NIL going. Please keep
keep him there.
Exactly. And that, when we were talking earlier about like the 10 like the last episode, we are talking about like the 10 like risk factors for a coach about to go. One of the ones that was like number 12 or 13 that's not on the top 10 list, but is right there, is times or like instances where you see on social media where rival fans are asking for the rival coach to stay.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually like when that happens, that's again one of those like, oh man, that coach is in deep trouble.
Yeah, like Michigan fans who were, the John Cooper fan, the John Cooper fan club out of Ann Arbor back in the 90s.
Right.
That's kind of the same sort of thing. I would say this, going back to Cignetti real quick, that he did something that was, other coaches have tried it in Indiana in football, and he's the first one to be successful. He was the first one to be successful at it. When, for most of our adultish lives, the tradition at IU was, if you had football tickets, you go to the game. And if you have a really cool tailgate that you're a part of, you're going to leave at halftime and there's no beer in the stadium. Let's roll, let's do this. And then, we'll just sit out here and listen to the end. If it gets interesting, we'll go back in. And, they've closed the gate, all that stuff. But he basically said, when he told the students, you can study later, nobody leave. We need you here 4 quarters. And he did it at such a time in the season where they were showing that the efficacy was much better. The product was much better. So it's like, okay, we've done our part. Now you do yours. And I think that's the type of challenge that's different than, you should just be here and don't just cheer. One is saying that we're doing this. So we would like this out of you. We expect this out of you.
Yeah.
And the inverse of that would be some other types of rhetoric that would suggest that you should just be privileged that we play basketball in the state of Indiana. Doesn't matter what we're doing, or soccer or whatever. So that's where we are with that, I think, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the communication and the tone that gets set from the top is so important. A great coach and tone setter will kind of show the fans how to support this program in the best way possible. Curt Cignetti did that. Obviously Archie Miller wasn't a great hire for several reasons. I think his ability to just connect with a fan base just wasn't really there. Tom Crean was able to do that for a little while. Mike Woodson did it early because of his built-in authority of being Mike Woodson, but it doesn't really feel like he's tried a lot since then. And it's like, man, just like respect us as basketball fans. We care. We know. We want to be part of the solution here. But also, I think if a fan base is going to feel ignored or taken for granted, or again, made it seem like the small vocal minority that's doing something negative is speaking for everybody, it's like, well, gosh, what is my role here? Why am I putting up with this? The product isn't good. And I'm kind of getting this almost feeling of animosity, even if it's not specifically directed toward me. I'm still part of this group. It just, it kind of goes back into that negative feedback loop. And so, what Cignetti did was totally different. And that's kind of the model, for I think how it works well.
Yeah. All right. So we'll wrap up in segment 3 on expectations, next on X's and Joes.
Welcome back to X's and Joes. So as we wrap up here, I think it goes without showing that we believe we know. It's not that we believe, we know IU is a luxury model program. We're not we're not a Yugo by any stretch of the imagination. We're not a Ford Festiva. No offense to anybody still driving a Ford Festiva, but if you're out there, you have my props because you kept that puppy running. But I think if you think we would think of ourselves not, and it's not unfounded we think of ourselves as a Cadillac program, because Mike said at one point, we're the second most valuable brand in college basketball. It should be said that Trilly Donovan will be thanking IU fans well into his retirement. If he has children or she has children, they're going to college based on IU fans and our proclivity, our ability to just pop $8 a month, $10 a month, $5 a month on a variety of different services. Ken Pomeroy is ecstatic at every time basketball season comes around, and the IU fans all just put back their money in there to look at his analytics. I mean, you look at his fan numbers, and it's pretty remarkable. So we know that this is a massive following. I mean, hell, right now there'll be about 1,000 to 2,000 people listening to us yammer about this for an hour and a half. That is a special group of people that are willing to support financially, emotionally, through their actions, words, thoughts, and deeds, this program, which I guess makes you it's a lot better position than being in, let's say, Middle Tennessee State, or even if you start going in the Power 5 model. I don't see this ever working at Mississippi State by any stretch of the imagination. I never see this type of investment in that type of program.
Yeah, as we've said before, just the resources you have do not guarantee success. But man, they're a really big advantage to have. Like, I would much rather have a huge NIL war chest. I would much rather have an arena that I play in and my team plays in that's called the Carnegie Hall of college basketball. I would much rather have like the media constantly paying attention to what's going on in my program than the opposite. And so if you ask athletic directors, which would you rather have? What would be better for you? They would absolutely take a situation like Indiana, even though obviously there comes with it some trade-offs, some issues that obviously pop up, especially when things start to go wrong. So again, I think like what Bob says is that it's definitely a luxury item, but I think when we think about our expectations is that that there's a difference between holding high expectations and deferring them. Like you can still hold high standards to what you expect your program to do and how it performs. But it doesn't mean you need to be pressing that button every second of the day. Like you can have high standards and also like take a break and go do other things, or like even watch your team lose and, not lose your mind over it. And still at the same time say, yeah, I think this coach needs to go. Like you can do both of those at the same time. And so it's, I think it's incumbent on fans to kind of remember that you still have some agency in how you conduct yourself within as a fan.
And I think it's important for coaches and for programs to show fans a roadmap for where this is going so you can hop on board. Tom Crane, I thought, did that in the beginning and had a lot of support. And obviously then that culminated in a fantastic season in 2013. That was a 5-year run where Indiana fans were pretty patient through some bad years because, I see where this is going. I see the vision. This guy's communicating with us. He kind of seems like he understands where we are. We can all get on board. That didn't last. I think there were good reasons why that didn't last. And unfortunately now with Archie and Coach Woodson, that hasn't necessarily, been the case. And so we'll see if there's a coaching change, if the next coach can do that. I think that's important because I think Indiana fans will come along for the ride and be more patient when they have an idea of where they're going that they believe in. And honestly, I think for 8 years and maybe even a few before that, that hasn't really been the case.
Yeah.
Well said, Jerod Morris. Well said. Well, we want to thank you again for coming on today. And really
thanks for having me.
You. Oh my gosh. It's we love opening the table at Denny's open to other folks. Perky will be by with coffee later. Do you remember Perky, Jerod? I mean, she was this infamous waitress at the Bloomington Denny's she was the late night waitress when we were there. Did you ever do late night Denny's runs?
Yes, but I don't remember a particular waitress though. It wasn't often, but I did do some late night Denny runs.
And if you look at me, that we probably did a few more than we should have, but that's beside the point. Perky was about, she looked old, but in reality, she's probably 5 years younger than I am right now. But when you're 20, that's old. She was just there. She was just she was a real, just a workhorse. I mean, she was there almost every night, I think. So
we didn't actually call her a workhorse, by the way.
We did not. That was cruel.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. We didn't say, hey, workhorse, get over here. No, it was, but I think one friend of our friends, Lou, would say, well, she didn't always look incredibly perky today. She was
not mention Lou.
Yeah. So that being said, Well, thanks again. We appreciate you coming on and for everything you've done to be a big support and a big help to us. Not just in making this happen. So we appreciate that greatly.
No, thank you guys.
So thanks to Bob Thompson for the music and sound of the show, and special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logo and look of the show.
Yeah, looking forward. Next episode 25, Into the Great Wide Open, how spacing and penetration have created a 3-point revolution in college basketball. Look for that probably about 2 weeks' time. We'll have more to report after we come back from the Back Home Network meetup. So until then, this endless conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including the Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Right Up Meridian, The Dribble Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and BackHomeNetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody. Enjoy.